Bueno, muy buenos días a todos. Mi nombre es Pablo Fernández, presidente de la Comisión de Refinación del DBECHT. Junto con Mariano Bertaina, los vamos a estar acompañando en este webinar como moderadores. Aprovecho para darle las bienvenidas a esta charla que vamos a tener, referida a los 3 puntos que la refinería debe hacer foco en una transición energética. Eh, También doy agradecimiento a los sponsors que nos permiten tener este espacio con ustedes. Quisiera antes de iniciar dar un par de parroquiales para tener una buena sesión, y es pedirle que sus cámaras y sus micrófonos estén apagados para tener una buena calidad en la transmisión de los conocimientos y las interacciones que hagamos. También pedirles, o contarles, mejor dicho, que va a haber un espacio abierto que arranca desde ahora de preguntas y respuestas, que la van a encontrar digamos, al pie de página del lado derecho. Ahí ustedes pueden formular sus preguntas durante la sesión o al finalizar. Esta sesión va a ser en inglés. Si consideran hacerlo en español, no hay ningún problema, se traducirá. Y si les va bien también el inglés, la pueden formular directamente en ese idioma. También el segundo parroquial, quería contarles respecto al Congreso de Refinación, que va a ser del 1 al 3 de junio del 2022. Nos encontramos ahora en una etapa de desarrollo de trabajos técnicos. Quisiera contarles que tenemos una nueva fecha de entrega y última, que es el 12 de enero. Así que van a tener ahí más tiempo para poder entregar sus trabajos. Y si hubiera ahí algún trabajo dando vuelta que no llegaron a hacer alguna sinopsis y consideren relevante, que sea parte de este congreso, por supuesto que sigue abierta la invitación. En lo particular, en esta charla que vamos a tener, mucho se está hablando de la transición energética. Lo hemos visto por muchos medios y de diferentes personas, algunas bien afín del lado técnico y otras no tanto, pero viene haciendo mucho ruido, y lejos de ser una moda que viene y pasa, sino es algo que vamos a transicionar a ese nuevo destino. Así que me parece muy oportuno esta charla por ese lado. Y por el otro, me encanta el título, lo quiero confesar, porque dentro de esta transición energética, bueno, ¿cuál es el papel que nos toca a nosotros los refineros, ¿no? Y acá hay 3 puntos de la cual nos va a traer Jean-Gaël y Nicola en esta sesión. Así que espero que sea de mucho provecho. Mariano Bertaina, ahora le doy el uso de la palabra para que presente a los oradores. Muchas gracias.
Bueno, muchas gracias, Pablo. Buenos días a todos. Mi nombre es Mariano Bertaina, soy líder de Becht para Latinoamérica y además tengo la suerte desde hace 7 años estoy integrando y participando en la Comisión de Refinación del DBECHT. Para nosotros es un gusto poder compartir con ustedes este webinario sobre, como decía Pablo, los 3 principales focos que las refinerías deben tener en cuenta en esto que es la transición energética. Y tenemos la suerte de tener a Jean-Gaël y a Henry, a quienes agradecemos y que en breve voy a presentar, y que de alguna manera quisimos que tenga el objetivo de compartir con ustedes quizá una perspectiva diferente, que es en este caso más la perspectiva o la experiencia desde Europa, quienes como lo saben, están quizá un paso adelante en todo lo que es transición energética, para que de ahí podamos tomar cuestiones o puntos que sean relevantes para nuestra región y para nuestras organizaciones. La presentación va a estar organizada en 3 partes. Primero Henry va a comentar un poco sobre el futuro de la energía. Jean-Gaël luego pasará específicamente a estos 3 puntos de la refinación, y finalmente también va a incluir una visión acerca de cómo está evolucionando o cómo están evolucionando las distintas energías alternativas en la actualidad. La charla, como decía Pablo, va a ser en inglés, así que yo ahora voy a switchar al inglés para presentar a Jean-Gaël y a Henry. So again, thanks everyone for your participation. To start the conference, I will invite Jean-Gaël and Henry to start their cameras, and I will quickly have an introduction of their bios. Jean-Gaël Floc has 25 years of experience in the hydrocarbon industry as a multidisciplinary expert. He's chemical engineer, specializes in supply chain, refining economics, and also with a wide range of experience in the industry. He has worked in more than 40 countries worldwide with an extensive knowledge in the European, Middle East, and African refining industry. Prior to joining Becht, Jean-Gaël held multiple positions in IFPEN, Axans, and KBC. He holds a Master of Science in Chemical Engineer for the INPG Grenoble French, and as well as postgraduate in the IFP School of France. Jean-Gaël joined Becht in 2020 as a manager of Becht for Europe, Middle East, and Africa operations. Henry is chemical engineer with a postgraduate degree in industrial business management, has 35 years of experience in developing the oil and gas industry, especially in downstream area. He worked for ExxonMobil, Pan American Energy as Director of Supply and Trading, and his experience includes refining optimization, logistics, training, and scheduling, planning, and economics. He also joined Becht 2020 as a consultant and is part of the business planning division, providing support in the areas of strategic planning, optimization, and energy transition to the different countries in Latin America. So thanks, Jean-Gaël and Henry. So I will invite you to start with the presentation.
Yes, thank you, Mariano. Henry, can you confirm that you can see the presentation?
Yes, it's okay.
Yes. Okay, thank you. Yeah, gracias, Mariano. So no hablo mucho español, entonces voy a hablar en inglés para presentar. So as Mariano indicated, the topic for today's presentation are the 3 areas, the 3 things that refineries should focus on as part of the energy transition. This presentation was initially prepared for some European refineries, so you will see some European angle in my presentation, but I did try to customize it for South America. Henry, do you want to take us through the overall, I would say, figures of the energy transition?
No se te escucha, Henry. Si querés probar sin los auriculares, por favor.
What about now?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, okay. I will check out my audio. Okay. Just before Jean-Gaël starts sharing the European experience in energy transition, I will spend a couple of minutes just giving a macro overview for the energy transition we see in both the total energy as well as the petroleum for the period 2020 to 2050. Let's start why we are talking about energy transition and what exactly is energy transition. The why is basically the CP21 Paris Agreement, recently supported by the Glasgow CP26. And the what is capping the global greenhouse emissions to limit to a maximum of originally 2 degrees Celsius global temperature increase by 2050. However, and because of a sense of urgency, the new target will be a maximum temperature increase of 1.5 Celsius above pre-industrial level. But the big challenge is how we're going to produce the vast amount, much more energy than we are producing today, at the same time than reducing or even eliminating the emission of greenhouse gases, and more specifically talking about CO2. But even more, we need to understand that this additional energy that we need to supply has to be secure, has to be accessible, affordable, and has to be sustainable. As we look forward and we think about energy transition, we have to keep in mind that the future will be dramatically different what we knew today and in the past. We need to start understanding that in terms of total population growth, we are expecting about 1.9 billion more people on this planet by 2050. And at the time this happens, we also expect the global GDP to increase an average, worldwide average of 2.7%. And if we consider the non-developed country, that number will get to close to 5%. What that means is that with this total population increase and the extra GDP, we are going to have a significant increase on the standard of living, mainly in countries like India, China, and many others. And this will result in giving access to electricity to more than 2.7 billion people. That means the energy requirement, the energy demand, is going to tremendously escalate, reaching more than 1.4 times the current energy demand. In this context, it's very difficult to think about petroleum industry going away. Oil demand could be flat, yes, or could be lower, but it is not going away. The demand of energy will be there, and we will need to supply in some way. If we look at the numbers on a percentage basis, for sure that the petroleum, the oil, and the coal will decrease their share on the total future matrix, and that portion will be replaced mainly by renewable energy, but also by natural gas or even by nuclear energy. When we're talking about absolute numbers, the picture could be different. As we see in the chart, there will be a lot of electrical vehicles entering the market, reducing demand for fossil fuel in cars, supported also by efficiency gain. But there are several fundamentals to still support liquid hydrocarbon consumption. The projection of fuel needed for trucking will be significantly higher than today. Same story for aviation fuels. And the most important, we expect a significant increase on demand of raw material for petrochemical to produce plastic, even though the optimistic recycling assumption projected by 2050. With this context, we see refining capacity to be long in the near term, despite you probably hear that a lot of several announcements made for shutting down or even converting some refinery to bioprocessing, but those announcements will be offset by some new refinery complex entering on stream in the next few years, for example, Nigeria, Middle East, or even China. However, when we look at the long term, refining capacity could start being short to accomplish all demand needs. And this future scenario is highly sensitive to utilization rate. The history shows that the average global utilization rate is around 80%. And in order to minimize that shortage, that projected shortage, the number has to be increased up to 85%. And this is not only will require the new refineries to be better utilized, which is totally possible because they are new complex and they show good performance, but also other existing refineries will need to improve utilization. As an example, to get the 85 average global utilization, refineries in South America will need to increase by 20% their rate, the utilization rate, which is very difficult to achieve. Saying that, refineries should be working on strategic plans to be prepared to operate under the new energy transition context, but keeping in mind, they also need operational and tactical plan to ensure they will keep reliable operation, maximizing utilization, improving yields while reducing energy intensity. With this overall picture, I'll pass the rest of the presentation to Jean-Gaël, who will tell us what is going on in Europe and the main challenges the refineries should be focused on for this energy transition period. Jean-Gaël, it's all yours.
Yes, thank you, Henry, for this very good introduction of the background of energy transition. As you indicated, well, let's deep dive into Europe. In Europe, the European Union has set a new target, which is called the Fit for 55, which means that in 2030, the emission reductions should be 55% below the 1990 baseline. The earlier target was only minus 40%, so this is 15% more. Now it's minus 55%. And we have this chart here that was developed by Congreso, an organization within Europe, with country colored in various color. You can see Europe is mainly blue and yellow, which means that some level of legislation has been adopted. Sometimes it is legislated already, sometimes it is a proposal stage. Same for the US and Canada. On the table on the right hand side, you can see where some countries stand today versus this minus 55 target. The best country is the UK with minus 47%. So they're already well underway to achieve the target, knowing that they have a net zero, so not minus 55, but a net zero target for 2050. The global European Union, so 27 countries average, we are at minus 35%. So we have done a little bit more than half, of the road that we need to do. Then we have other countries with figures in yellow, might not be easy to read. They range from minus 16% to minus 3%. This is US, Japan, South Korea, Canada, and Australia. So those countries have done some efforts compared to 1990, but they are still not well on track, I would say, to achieve the net zero for 2050. So those countries need to ramp up their efforts. And at the bottom of the table, we have two, I would say, major industrial countries, China and India. And as you can read, their emissions, CO2 equivalents, have increased, as of today compared to 1990. The Chinese emissions have increased by about 80%, and the Indian by about 70%. So those two countries, will need to go from plus 70 or plus 80% to a net zero. China has put a year 2060. India has not yet announced, a future timing for being a net zero country. So that's the status today. If we look at the map for South America, and we'll come back to that later on, we have maybe a couple of countries where this is achieved or proposed for legislations. The rest is still under discussion. I put on the bottom left of this slide a tweet from Antonio Guterres, from the United Nations, commenting on the COP26. So his comment was that the COP26 outcome is a compromise. So it's an important step that countries did discuss together and achieve to agree on something, but this is not enough. So he was expecting more from the countries, and he thinks that what was accepted from COP26 is not enough to reach, and fight against global warming. So what is the first of the three focus areas that refineries should look at in terms of energy transition? Well, the first point is to be resilient via agility. So it may be less acute in South America, but in Europe, refineries are closing every year. So every year we have refineries closed, converted to oil terminals, sometimes converted to biorefineries, but not always. And this will be going on for Europe. I've put a couple of charts here from Rystad Energy showing for Europe the forecast refining capacity. And if you look mainly at the right-hand chart with different colors corresponding to different global warming impacts, 1.6, 1.8, and 2 degrees, basically from 2020, 2021, where we are today, there is about 70% decrease in the refining capacity, just due to a decrease in demand in the standard oil products, gasoline and diesel. That's the most, I would say, that's the highest value I have found in the literature. Some other values are maybe less, not as high as 70%, knowing that Rystad forecasts, a lower decrease for example, Asia Pacific, only 30% decrease by 2050. And they didn't provide a forecast for South America, so I don't have that value for you. But so the key question is, well, which refineries will remain, in 2030, in 2040? Which one will be stopped and which one will still be in operation? And how should you prepare your refinery? So the first point is to be resilient, so back to basics. Your operational excellence. Every company has a different definition for operational excellence, but quite often we find 3 elements, which is to have a safe, reliable, and profitable operation. Safe and reliable is very important. If you think of Europe again, if a refinery has an incident that shuts down one of their major process units, maybe the FCC, the hydrocracker, or the crude unit, and that unit is down for weeks or months, well, maybe it will never start again. That might be the factor that will decide which refineries will shut down and which one will still be in operation in 10 or 20 years' time. So being safe and reliable is really the first key important element to be able to progress in your energy transition path. One example where Becht can support, we have combined, on the crude oil selection topic, which is a key element for refinery margin, selecting the right crudes to process in your refinery and make the right products for your own market. And every refinery will be different in that respect. And making sure that the crude selection has as little impact as possible on the reliability of your refinery. So we have combined the crude supply part of things with some corrosion forecast modeling in your crude and vacuum units, not only in terms of crude mix, that's of course an important factor. What type of crude are you going to mix as a basket for your refinery, but also the sequencing, the running of those crude mixes is important, because some crudes will build a protective layer in your units, and some other crudes or crude mix will destroy that protective layer, depending on some, I would say, key quality parameters such as a TAN number, for example, sulfur content, and so on. So that's a tool that we have proposed to the industry to link the profitability and the reliability aspects of your units. When I presented this this presentation in Europe, I was with a live audience. I was not virtual like today, so I did ask this first multiple choice question to the audience. So I will read through it, but so you have time to prepare to respond. On the WebEx menu, you should have a preguntas y respuestas section, and you will be able to answer, provide just typing in over there the answer that fits to your own refinery. So the question is, which energy transition paths are you already investigating or implementing a new refinery. One response could be improve energy efficiency of the existing refinery. Another one, electrification of your assets. Motors for compressors, for example, from steam drives to electrical motors. Produce SAF, which is sustainable aviation fuel or renewable diesel. Maybe you are looking at biomass or waste pyrolysis, CO2 capture or CCS, CCUS, green hydrogen, so from electrolysis process, maybe a renewable power production, your own wind farm or solar farm, or e-fuels, so electricity to liquid, power to liquid, or others. So if you want to provide your answers in the preguntas y respuestas section, and I should be able to see the answers and then indicate which one pop up more often. I'll give you a few seconds. I will also indicate to you which answers we got in Europe to that question. Yeah, I don't see many answers on the preguntas y respuestas, so I'll give you the answers that came up. Okay, I start to see some of them here. Improve energy efficiency, wind farm, 1 and 2, so energy efficiency and electrification. Improve energy efficiency. I've got 1, 2, waste, wind and solar farm. One and 2. Okay, so there is one element that might be different from the answers I got in Europe. What is common is the 1 and 2, so energy efficiency of your refinery. Not only in terms of single process units, so optimizing on one specific process units, the energy efficiency, but also in terms of utilities, so between process units, and electrification of some of the existing assets. That's also came up in Europe as answer. Number 3, so sustainable aviation fuel and renewable diesel was also a very strong answer in Europe. I had very little biomass or waste pyrolysis so far, and CO2 capture and green hydrogen did get some answer in Europe, less compared to energy efficiency. And we had no one indicated wind farm or solar farm in Europe, while I can see some answers here for wind farms. So this might be something different in South America. And again, nothing on e-fuels for now, and we'll come back to that later in the presentation. So thanks for all the answers you have provided. So we see some common themes and some different. So I see no sustainable kerosene and no sustainable renewable diesel in South America, but you have a wind and solar farm interest. So focus number 2. Well, as many of you have answered in the chat, yes, it's efficiency of your existing assets. So point number 1 was making sure you are resilient by being safe and reliable. You need to be efficient in terms of efficiency. This is from the IEA, and that's a very recent post. So it's not only for the refining industry, it's for all industries, but efficiency is stated as one of the key elements that will enable us to reach a target, if we are to reach our target. You can read on the right-hand side, renewable fuels, some fuel switching, like for the marine, switching from fuel oil to LNG, for example. And nuclear has a small play there, 3%, carbon capture, and 12% of others. But energy efficiency is really a key factor. And that's also valid for all refineries. So what does it mean for all refineries? First, starting with the power system. So of course, all your shaft work, and I mentioned steam versus electrical motors. That's one potential area to look at. Power generation, what configuration do you have? And this will be unique for each refinery. Do you import power from the grid? do you export to the grid maybe? Do you operate on island mode, which means more or less independent, and you just marginally import or export? And the last bullet is something we start hearing from in Europe is battery power systems. So batteries, industrial batteries, to store power, and then be able to give that power back to your assets as need be. The fuel systems, different sources, natural gas, fuel oil, LNG, LPG, hydrogen. And this is very hot in Europe at the moment with a high natural gas price. I have a client last week that indicated to me, okay, we have stopped our hydrogen plant, their steam methane reformer. They say the natural gas price is too high, so we stopped our H2 production units. We just maximized our naphtha reformer severity, not to target an octane, but target maximum hydrogen from their reformer. So they have enough hydrogen for their hydrotreaters, and they will have excess octane, excess aromatics from their reformer. They say we'll cut a benzene hurt cut and we'll sell it. But the purpose is to stop the hydrogen plant, because it's just not, the LP indicates it's not beneficial anymore to make hydrogen from natural gas with such a high price. Heat integration, I indicated. Something that is sometimes forgotten is the flaring and fugitive emissions, especially the methane slips, because methane has a factor of 21 compared to CO2 when recording the equivalency of emissions. So that's also a very important source of emissions. Heat integration, so within a process unit and utilities between process units. Relating to that, the fouling analysis, your heat exchanger, like a crude unit heat exchanger fouling, ensuring you really clean the one that you can clean, if you have tie-in to remove the heat exchanger while keeping the CDU running, and optimizing, the cleaning sequence of all those exchangers. If you need to replace exchanger because of asset integrity, that tubes are leaking or exchanger is near end of life, maybe consider some bundle technology upgrade, replaced by a better technology for improved energy efficiency and heat transfer. Water systems also. That's a good place where you can do global analysis in your refineries and save on water, save on makeup water, so saving on your energy. So these are different elements that you can look at in your refinery to improve your energy efficiency globally. So focus number 3, once you've optimized, I would say, your assets, is yes, what do you need to change or what do you need to add to your existing refinery for the future? And these are topics that are, I would say, under study by different refineries in Europe. We mentioned most of them already. Renewable diesel, looking at importing low carbon electricity. So the refinery would not produce low carbon power themselves, but they would have a solar farm or wind farm nearby owned by someone else, but selling the power to the refinery. Electrification, looking at gas turbines, revamp and retrofit for the future, making those gas turbines flexible so they can fire a high hydrogen mix in the future. And we've done a lot of revamp studies in that domain. The rest of CO2 capture, I will go in more details later on, so I will skip for now. Let's start with the fuel. So low carbon liquid fuel. In Europe, we've got what we call the first generation, which comes from food crop. So for gasoline, it's mainly ethanol, and for diesel, it's FAME, up to a certain percentage. That varies, country to country. Yes, these are, I would say, the first generation biofuels, and these are additives, added to your hydrocarbon gasoline and hydrocarbon diesel. The next generation is HVO, so hydrotreated vegetable oil, or waste oil and fats co-processing in your existing units, or processing in new standalone units. We can see the two options being studied and being implemented in Europe at the moment. So where would you co-process them? It's mainly in hydroprocessing units, so in your HDS, gasol HDS, mild hydrocracker, residue hydrocracker, if you have those units, but also on FCC. So we do see co-processing of biofeedstock into FCC units. The pyrolysis routes and the e-fuels are less under study at the moment. So it's really HVO, waste oil and fats that are really the focus area in Europe at the moment. So moving from the renewable fuels that we just discussed, on this slide you can see then multicolor hydrogen and solar and wind. So we'll have some deeper slides later on those two topics. Multicolor hydrogen, the color commonly used is gray for your hydrogen if it's from a steam methane reformer, blue if you add carbon capture, green if it is from electrolysis, and then some other types of colors have been added in the literature. I see yellow, turquoise, pink. I think well, everyone can think of a new color for hydrogen. I prefer to stick to gray, blue, and green. These are the main ones to remember. So hydrogen could be a good way so to have an energy, I would say, source for the future. It could be transported. And the fuel cell efficiency is good in vehicles, but it does have some drawbacks that we'll look at later on. The challenges, as you can see, are maybe relating to the production, so ensuring there is no CO2 emitted. In a steam methane reformer, it's maybe 10 tons of CO2 per ton of hydrogen. Transportation, so safe transportation of the hydrogen, supply chain, and distribution. So in Europe, when vehicles had LPG, there was always some car park that were forbidden for those vehicles because of the pressurized LPG tanks in those cars. So there is a safety element to take into account when looking at hydrogen. Solar and wind, I will go very soon into more details. Going back to this net zero national policies, on this map, I just wanted to look at the South American picture. I see that one country apparently has achieved. It's somewhere near Guyana or Suriname. I'm not sure which country that is. I can see Chile has adopted a law, and then Argentina is in green. So there is a policy document being developed, same as Brazil. Other countries are less advanced and are in yellow or red. Yeah. So there is some interest in South America, and politicians are discussing, what should be the national policy for every country. So wind and solar, where does South America stand off today? So this is the production per capita, which means per person in the country. Yeah. So first on solar, so on the left-hand side, and the purple charts are the South American country. We can see Chile, which is number 2 in the world, so per capita, and Honduras. So those two countries have high solar production per person. And then the right-hand chart, the wind, I can see Uruguay and Panama. So these are the two countries in South or Central America which have a high wind power production per capita. You can see a lot of green on the winds. This is European countries, especially Northern Europe. On the solar, you can see Middle East now. So the UAE, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, Israel. So those countries in the desert, have already started to invest into solar. At Becht, we are also working on wind farms and solar type of topic, on very niche type of specialties. This case study here is in the port of Rotterdam, where we validated the heavy lifting of the nacelle from the GE, from General Electric. That's a 13 megawatt capacity. This was in 2019. It was the largest capacity for a single wind farm in the world. And it required 2 cranes at 90% of their load. And we validated all the lifting plan for General Electric for that installation. So Becht is present in wind and solar if you need us for your projects in that area. So where does the world go? This is a 2020 picture. And looking at the South America, I can see some blue circles in Argentina, so wind, onshore and offshore. Some yellow in Chile, so solar PV, and some gray, some blue as well in Brazil, so onshore wind and offshore wind. So that's more or less today or just yesterday in 2020. Moving to 2025, plotting it here, and these are the projects announced. I can see more in Brazil, so yellow has popped up in Brazil, so solar PV projects I've put there. I can see a hydrogen electrolyzer project, maybe in, not sure which country, maybe Uruguay. And then Argentina, I can see some more blue bubbles, so some more wind farm, onshore wind and offshore wind projects. So that's the current announced projects for 2025. Just one slide on nuclear. So I had a quick look this morning. I think in Argentina, nuclear is about 5% of your power. So you have a few reactors, but it doesn't supply most of your electricity. You are about 2/3 on fossil fuel and maybe 1/3 on renewable and hydropower. The question here is written in French on the top left. I will just translate. It's a poll that was done with the French population in 2017 on, well, do you think that nuclear plants contribute to global warming? And the dark red answer is a lot. The medium red is a little bit, and green means not at all. And you can see the evolution from 2014 to 2017. Well, 80% or 85% of the French population think that nuclear plants contribute to global warming, which is not the case. It does have other types of pollution. We could discuss that for hours, but a nuclear plant doesn't contribute to global warming. The clouds that we see from the very large cooling towers of the nuclear plants are just water vapor, just like a cloud in the sky. It's not pollution, but the public image is very different. On the right-hand side, this is a very recent topic in California, the Diablo Canyon nuclear plant that was initially said to be shut down and dismantled. And then some studies were performed. Okay, if we shut it down and dismantle it, what's the impact on emissions? And well, removing this power plant from California would increase the CO2 emissions from California. So now politicians are reviewing their decision and maybe looking at more extending the life of this plant rather than shutting it down. And then finally, just a tweet from Elon Musk that has invested into Tesla and electrical vehicles, for example, and he thinks nuclear plants should not be shut down. Well, it does need the power to feed his cars, so that's maybe one of the reasons that he posted this tweet. Hydrogen projects. So with nuclear energy or hydro energy as you have, we can make green hydrogen. You can see this map of the 2050 announced projects, so projects between today and 2050. I see a lot of gray, so just steam methane reformer, and green, so via electrolysis, and very little blue, so which is my surprise. Because blue hydrogen is, I would say, a steam methane reformer with carbon capture. So which might be a quicker way to progress, than going directly for green hydrogen if we want to really reduce CO2 emissions. Taking a gray, so a normal steam methane reformer, and revamping it for a carbon capture might be a quicker way than going for a brand new and different technology. And what's the view of the car makers? This is a slide from Volkswagen. Hydrogen for fuel cell vehicles and versus EVs, versus electrical cars. And it's the same for trains. Well, electrical vehicles can have, let's assume, energy from wind farm, so green energy. Well, it's just then the storage of the electricity in the vehicle on the batteries going to the engine, and you've got 70 to 90% efficiency. if you want to use this wind farm to make hydrogen and use the hydrogen in your car in the future, well, the loss through the supply chain is really much more. First, there is the electrolysis with about 30% loss, then compression of the hydrogen, filling, and then the fuel cell efficiency as well. And we end up with 25 to 35% efficiency. So if you make green energy, just use the electricity directly. Don't waste efficiency in trying to make hydrogen if it's for vehicles. I skip this slide for the sake of time. You will have, I guess, a copy of the slides from the organizer. Carbon capture. I won't deep dive too much. This is for Europe. The top left chart was in 2019 with first, where are the CO2 emissions in Europe? So on the very top left corner. And where do we have storage capacities like depleted oil fields, depleted gas fields, saline aquifers, and so on. And there is quite a match. You know, the Belgium, Netherlands, UK, part of Europe is a high emission area, but does have potential storage area. And then going to the right-hand side, the bottom right, these are the projects for CCS, carbon capture, and storage in Europe. And you can see this map matches well with the one on the top left. So the projects have been really implemented or are being implemented in the right areas because they are just logical. But you can see some projects, you know, in the southern part of Europe, which maybe were less evident and less obvious to put in. So it is still possible to look at saline aquifers, you know, if there is no depleted gas field for your carbon capture. In terms of reuse of the CO2, if we don't want to just store it underground, but we want to reuse it, currently CO2 is used mainly for urea, that's 57% of the CO2 use, enhanced oil recovery, so that's the upstream oil business, and beverages, 3%. So that's what we put in our Coca-Cola and lemonade and so on. But yes, there's so much Coca-Cola we drink, you know, we are not going to multiply by 10 what we drink. So those outlets, I would say, are limited. So some companies are looking at new outlets for CO2. You've got here the methanol route, some chemicals, some building materials, so concrete, so special concrete with CO2 added into it. On the other side, yeah, I see heat transfer fluid, solvent, and boosting all the greenhouses or algae fertilizer. So these are currently the routes that are under study. The one element to remember, it's in bold at the bottom here, well, how long will it be retained? How long will the CO2 be retained in the final product? Because if it's just to go into a product and then be released 2 years or 5 years later, then it is only a very short-term solution. So key is to think, where can we put the CO2 and it's retained for a long time? In terms of financing the new types of projects, the traditional approach, I would say, in the refining industry is a rate of return, you know, and you have different type of KPIs, net cash recovery, net present value, and so on, payout time. This is changing in Europe with the pressure from ESG, so environmental, social, and governance. So these are new criteria that are now being taken into account for decisions of projects, not only in the operating companies or in the refineries themselves, but in the financial institutions as well. So the banks, the traders, the people that have money and will lend you money for your capital projects, they will be looking at new types of KPIs for your projects. So this is important to keep in mind, not just the business case, but the environmental case, I would say, of your investment project. So in Europe, again, that's a high-level picture of the next 10-year evolution. This is from Congreso. We have the first generation biofuels already existing, the second generation HVO. This is under development. Biomass and waste, as you can see, we expect a first of a kind, biomass to liquid in maybe 2023. So this is, I would say, medium term. E-fuels, longer term, maybe a first of a kind in 2025. And CCS and green hydrogen, yes, this is also a topic that is under investigation by multiple refineries in Europe. And we can see here first of a kind, maybe 2022, 2023. That's just a full picture of, in Europe, the time scale of those various types of technologies, and expected implementation, and you have the how much on the right-hand side. I have a second question. We are near the end of the presentation. So again, I did ask this question in Europe. So in terms of challenges you face when you want to progress in terms of energy transition in your refinery, what are the main challenges? Is it that your corporate strategy is not clear? So your company hasn't decided, very precisely what direction to go? Is it that the regulatory framework is not stable? So the law, the legislation is not stable. Maybe the investment business case is not beneficial. So the capex is too high versus the benefit. You have a lack of access to financing. So you don't find lenders to give you the money to finance your projects, or the technologies are not, I would say, fully developed and commercially viable yet. So again, if you could answer in the preguntas y respuestas section, and I will also let you know what answers I got in Europe. Okay, I got some first answer on a regulatory framework. Yep. Yeah, well, you keep answering. I see it's 3, 4, 5. So that's investment case not valid, lack of financing and technology not viable. Yeah. Regulatory framework. Investment business case not beneficial. Okay, so in Europe, the main hurdle that was declared was, as surprising as it could be, was regulatory framework is not stable. Despite the European Union being there, and dictating, I would say, or guiding each country does evolve at its own pace, basically. Which means that the companies that are sometimes multinational, one entity could have refineries in multiple countries. They feel that the regulatory framework is not clear enough, especially in terms of carbon tax and CO2 tax. I think that was a key element of the answer in Europe. So it is difficult to make a decision today if we don't have all the elements of the equation in hand, and the pricing of CO2 is not known, and nobody has a crystal ball to know what the price will be in the future. That's a key element where we would need more, I would say, political guidance and political decisions, to firm up maybe some carbon CO2 pricing, carbon tax, for example, as well for imports. And this will help decisions being taken from the industrials and from the refineries. So summary slide. So what do you need to look at in your energy transition? Well, first is each refinery is different. Your economic environment, your technical assets, your industrial assets are different. And Becht is here to help you take the right decision at the right time. We have the holistic view. For example, I was in Middle East this week, Monday to Friday, at a conference. I met with the oil minister of Bahrain. And over there, they don't talk about biofuels. They import all their food. They have no crop and nothing to use as a feed to their refinery, from trees or crops. So they are really into carbon capture and hydrogen, and that's all. So every region, every country, every refinery will have their specific environment. The investment decision timing and volume, so how much and how big a project do you go for, is important. And we see different types of attitudes in refineries. Some refineries want to be the first in the game, invest early, and hopefully take early benefits of their investment. Some others prefer to wait, see what are the others doing, I will invest later. And we see both type of behaviors. Biomass feedstock availability and scalability for the renewable fuels, so SAF and renewable diesel. Like a client asks us about cashew nut shell oil. So cashew nut shells, so the shells around the cashew nuts, you crush them to make oil, and they would co-process that as HVO into their unit. Well, it is technically possible, but the volumes are very low. Power costs are set to remain high. So natural gas prices have increased. Power costs will remain high, especially if we go more and more for renewables, because we do need, at night when there is no sun, when the days when there is no wind, we need some over investment in capacity, or we do need the backup from traditional power plants. For anything relating to batteries, well, metals will be a critical element of the supply chain. The mining industry is, I would say, condensed in a few countries for each metal. So the countries are different per metal, I would say. The processing of those metals is largely in the hand of China, more or less for every metal. And then the end use for power storage and batteries. So mining, processing, and battery development will be the critical path for electrical vehicles and anything relating to batteries. And last, as I indicated already, is the ESG impact on your corporate decisions. So not only a business case, but with the environmental and CO2 climate case will need to be taken into account. Okay, well, thank you for listening to me today. And then I'm here with Henry, and we are happy to take your questions. Yeah.
So thank you very much, Jean-Gaël and Henry, for your presentation. We have some questions, and in order to really respect the time, I will pick a couple, and then we will for sure respond to the rest of the questions via email. So thanks you for the presentation, and thanks all the participants for your participation and questions. So the first question I have is, it says, besides CO2, many researchers are bringing to the table the effect of methane in global warming, proposing that all the methane emissions, including fugitive emissions, along the oil and gas value chain should be considered. What is your view about this for the refining industry? I think that...
Yes, I mentioned it. I do agree. The end objective is global warming, or fighting against global warming. That's what we want to do. And we have basically taken a shortcut. We take, CO2 equivalent or CO2 emissions, because CO2 in volume might be the main gas, contributing to global warming, but methane, has a factor, if I recall, of 21. So one, I don't know if it's in weight or volume, but one methane is equivalent to 21 CO2. So also in volume methane slippage or methane emissions, and it could be via flaring, that's one of the parts. That's an important part. So it's valid for the upstream industry, but also in the refining industry. Absolutely. So this should be taken into account. And methane slippage, that's something we could help you look at if that's one of your focus areas.
Perfect. Thanks, Jean-Gaël. And the second one is, it says, do you think refineries in Argentina or South America have to move fast and start adopting new technologies now, or wait and see development in the most developed countries? I think that you mentioned something. And what we need to consider when developing a strategic plan.
Yeah, I think some elements will remain political. So you will need a legislation in your country, in Argentina, or wherever, if you're in Chile or Brazil, in Chile and Brazil, but you need the legislation to be stable. Otherwise, it's difficult to take a high-intensive capex decision. We are talking millions, billions sometimes of dollars. If the legislation will change in 5 years when a new president is elected, the decision will not be taken. So that's really the fundamental, is to understand what the future policy would be. So that's why it's very important. I saw in South America, I think Chile maybe has already legislated something. They have solar investment, if I recall. So possibly the fact they have legislated something did help all those solar projects to come in life, I would say. And then once the legislation is in place, in terms of which technology to choose, yeah, then that's a case-by-case basis. You do have access maybe to hydropower near the refinery, then you have like green electricity available. If you don't have hydropower, you have the, as I would say, natural gas power plant, then okay, maybe you could invest into solar, wind, and of course, as a first step, as we indicated, energy efficiency.
Good. So thanks, Jean-Gaël. So I think that with this, we will respond the rest of the questions via email
Okay.
if appears, and you can also, for the participant, if you find something that came to your mind later, just let us know, and we will respond to you, even writing to myself, Henry, or Jean-Gaël, no problem. So I will switch to Spanish, and thanks again, Jean-Gaël and Henry, for the presentation.
Thank you, Mariano.
Thank you. Ahora, bueno, nuevamente, gracias a todos por participar. Creo que fue interesante poder escuchar la perspectiva y ver diferentes alternativas, ver la diferente evolución de las energías alternativas. Así que bueno, muchas gracias al IAPG en nombre de Becht por permitirnos compartir con ustedes esta experiencia de Jean-Gaël y Henry. Y ahora, Pablo, te dejo a vos para que cierres. Muchas gracias a todos.
Gracias, Mariano. Gracias, Jean-Gaël. Gracias, Henry. La verdad, una presentación muy interesante que nos dio un panorama completo de lo que pasa en el resto del mundo. Un buen termómetro para nosotros de cómo estamos parados hoy respecto al resto, ¿no? Así que de muy alta calidad y un panorama completo en cuanto a todas las dimensiones que va a tomar el consumo de energía, ¿no? Las alternativas que tenemos para hacerlo. Así que esta sesión está grabada, para los que quieren volver a reproducir, está en la página del IAPG, ahí podrán encontrar esta sesión, como también la información que se compartió, y como bien se dijo, si hubieren más preguntas que surjan, están ahí los contactos de Jean-Gaël, Henry o Mariano. También quería comentarles, y nuevamente muchísimas gracias a los expositores. Si este tema les pareció interesante en cuanto a transición energética, vamos a continuar hablando de esto y mucho más en el próximo Congreso de Refinación en junio, del 1 al 3 de junio del 2022. Este va a ser uno de los grandes ejes del Congreso, entre otras cosas, lo que es transición energética. En este sentido estamos planeando inclusive una mesa redonda con casos prácticos. Les hago ahí una van premier de refinerías que ya han transicionado en el mundo, ¿no? Así que ya vamos a ver ejemplos reales en el Congreso. Así que están todos cordialmente invitados para que se sumen a este Congreso. Y también recordarles nuevamente lo que les dije al principio, que el 12 de enero es la fecha final para la presentación de los trabajos. Muchas gracias a los que han participado también, los que nos han honrado con su presencia en este webinar y que le dan sentido también. Gracias por estos temas que han dedicado para hablar de transición energética. Gracias al IAPG, gracias a Alejandra y a Jorgelina en la organización, una vez más, impecable. Y bueno, feliz año, feliz Navidad y nos vemos pronto. Muchas gracias.